Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
To our channel.
American guy, Chinese
Chinese
girl. Okay. Today, Shuang's prepared some questions about what it might be like for a Chinese citizen to come to the United States, somebody that's grown up within Chinese culture, things that might help you if you were going to come to the United States.
Yeah, and it's mainly you share the perspective that you think is gonna help the Chinese people because you grew up here and you lived here all your whole life.
And also, since I've been able to spend some time in China, I've also observed some about Chinese culture, and I have ideas about what it would be good to have some awareness of as you come to this culture.
Okay. The first question is, what are the things Chinese people need to understand before coming to US, whether it's travel or live here, in terms of social customs or politeness, the things they need to be aware to not offending people here.
Okay, so to not offend people, I think two things come to my mind quickly. And the biggest thing is spatial awareness. So, people talk about having a personal bubble, a personal space. And not only that, it's also just spatial awareness in general. The way people move around in China is different from the way people move around in the United States. For example, if you're walking in a grocery store or a mall, it's often very crowded in China. And so people are way more used to being close together and perhaps just stopping randomly, maybe making a turn without looking if there's other people coming. And they don't worry too much about getting in each other's way. Everyone just kind of moves around each other, and it seems to be not as big of a deal. In the United States, that's not the way it is. If you get in somebody's way, if you obstruct their path, you kind of need to be aware of the people around you and make sure you move in a way that respects their motion. If somebody is already walking in a certain direction and you cut in front of them and force them to stop, this is considered to be disrespectful and just a lack of awareness, and you will frustrate people. And then also a really big one is personal space. And I think this is something that's really, really important for Chinese people to be aware of, because the personal space bubble in China is way less than the personal space bubble in the United States. And this has multiple impacts. One of the impacts is this affects communication, even with people that you're close to. Many times you might have misunderstandings that are purely a result of that the person you're talking to is comfortable getting much closer to you than you are. And so you may think they're trying to communicate something by getting really close to you. Maybe they're trying to communicate aggression, but they're not being aggressive at all. That's just Chinese culture, and that's a comfortable distance to be.
And this point is trying to teach American, don't take, if you see a Asian person getting too close, they don't mean anything bad. It's just
Yes.
their culture is that way.
And I would just add on to it, it's very, very difficult to process because it's so ingrained, your perspective on what distance means. It's not something that really gets taught in school. It's just deeply ingrained, deeply informed from being a child and the way that you're raised. And so even if you're aware of this, it can be really hard to know how to interpret the distance and the personal space. But it's just something that for that reason, you just want to make yourself as aware about it as you possibly can. And if you find yourself getting frustrated, just try to remind yourself about personal space, and maybe it's just a difference about that. Beyond that, personal space is also important just when you're dealing with people in public. And you need to be aware that when you're in public environments, you need to leave people an appropriate amount of space and be patient. Give people patience and space to operate. We were talking about a situation that happened once at a grocery store where Shuang reached in to get some sushi and just came too close to somebody. And she had no awareness that this was the case, and agitated this person. And this person had no idea of the cultural difference that Shuang had. I think this person may have very well assumed that Shuang grew up in American culture because Shuang is very familiar with American culture and kind of demonstrates that with her action and her presentation. But in this particular case, the woman was not able to interpret that way and became very frustrated, and it created sort of kind of a problem. And I guess I'll leave it at that. But it's just it's I say that so that you understand it's something to be aware of, and that this can happen to anybody, and you just need to be aware that personal space is a serious issue.
It's a big difference.
Yes. And you can really aggravate people with it.
And you don't want really mess with one person in America, as we talked before. In China, you don't need to worry the other person has a guns. But here, everyone can kind of own guns and just pew pew.
Yeah, it's unlikely, but yes, you do want to be aware of it for sure, because that would be the worst mistake of your life. I mean, so you don't want to make that mistake.
To the news.
The stakes are too high, the stakes are too high. So you got to be careful. Another thing that I'd say culturally to be aware of, and this is maybe much less significant, but as it pertains to food and eating, there are sort of different habits with eating. For example, Americans tend to eat a dish that's just prepared for them. And there's a lot less sort of family style meals, family style eating. So if you get served a dish, it's not very typical that somebody's going to eat off your plate, or you're going to put something from your plate onto somebody else's, or that food is shared. It can happen. It's not a huge deal, but it's more customary that what's on your plate is yours, what's on somebody else's plate is theirs. And
you got to ask. You can't just dip in, grab from someone else.
Unless you have like a special kind of relationship, like a close friendship, maybe you guys play around like that. But with a normal relationship with somebody you don't know as well, that would be very rude if you tried to reach onto their plate and take something, or vice versa. If they just randomly took something from their plate and put it on yours, you'd be like, it would be weird, because it's crossing what's typically more a personal space. They don't have that right to put something on your plate unless they have a much closer relationship with you. And then also with tipping culture, that in the United States there is a tipping culture, and that's not common. That doesn't exist in China. And so it's customary to tip somewhere between 15 to 20%. 15% is considered standard. 20% these days is considered standard as well. But it's also considered goods for good service. You would do 20%, and maybe these days 25% if it's exceptional service. And that's just part of the way it is here. And you really need to tip, because the wait staff only makes a very small amount of money per hour, less than what's legally allowed for any other profession by far, because everyone knows they're going to make tips, and the government knows they're going to make tips. So they only make money. It's only worth their time at all, even close, if they're getting reasonable tips. So if you come in and you tip something like 5% or don't leave a tip, it really hurts that person's ability to make money. They really depend on the tips, and it's a unique opportunity to express to somebody, to give feedback in monetary form what you thought of the service.
But these days, I saw people discussing online, the tipping culture in the US is really out of control. Even if you go to, for example, a coffee place, and then once you put your card to check out, they would let you check, do you want the lowest one is even like 18% or sometimes 20%. So for this case, if you are not sit down and eating, you totally just hit that no tip button. Or if you want to support them, just give them $1 or $2, but don't feel any pressure. I feel like you are not expected to give a tip. Yeah, in that setting.
I would agree with that to some extent. It's a unique time in the tipping culture, in the history of tipping culture right now in the U.S. and Western culture, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, the second question is, what are the things that you can share with our audience that will help Chinese people increase their personal safety in the United States?
Okay, so a few things. Off the top, I wanted to talk about driving. I think for me, I find it just fascinating personally, the differences in driving all over the world. And this is something, driving itself is very dangerous, as we all know. People die, lots of people die every year from car accidents. So it's something to take very seriously. You want to be safe. And in coming from China, if you're used to driving in China and you're coming to the United States, I think that there are some things that you need to be aware of that are dangerous if you aren't kind of aware of some of the differences, the fundamental differences. And you really need to kind of develop your awareness of that and think about it and how that might impact your driving and how that might impact what you need to be aware of and what you might need to change about what you're looking for in the road. And one of those things is that the speed of traffic overall and the aggressiveness overall in the U.S. is much more. It's much more than it is in China. In China, in general, people tend to drive at a pretty moderate pace. And if I'm familiar with miles per hour, so I'm going to talk in miles per hour. In China, on one road, if you have the same exact road that's in China and in the U.S., in China, they're probably driving about 30 miles per hour. In the U.S., they're probably driving around 40 to 45 miles per hour. And so this means that in the cities, in different areas, they're going way faster. And this changes everything because your reaction time and your attention to detail and awareness of others needs to be much higher in order to drive safely in the United States. And this kind of goes back to how we talked about in Chinese culture. There's less need to have spatial awareness because people aren't so worried about getting in each other's way, and they just if somebody gets in one person's way, you just walk around them and go about your business. And the same thing is true on the roads to a significant extent. I see all the time that people don't even look left before they turn right, and they'll just turn right out in front of somebody that's coming, and those people will just stop. If you do that in the U.S., they will hit you. There's a very good chance they're going to hit you because they do not expect at all that you're going to make that right turn. It is your obligation to see that people are coming and yield to people that have the right of way. They have the right to travel in that direction because they're there first and they're traveling with speed. And you need to enter safely with respect to everyone else. And so it also, just your reaction times need to be higher. And so that is a significant challenge. But once you get used to the flow of traffic, there are things that can be a little bit easier about American traffic. For example, there's not nearly as many like scooters and electric vehicles and different things that are traveling at very unique speeds that you don't have to worry about that at all on American roads. But I would just stress that again, and I'll move on from this point, but driving, don't deceive yourself or don't let yourself underestimate how much different it is. You need to have a heightened sense of focus and effort when you drive, when you're coming from China to America to be safe. It's going to be difficult, okay? All right, so we're going to talk about cities and how to be safe and avoid bad areas. So I think you said maybe you could talk about in China you don't have to worry as much about bad areas. Is that?
Yeah. And basically here in US, you have to be super careful, especially if you are near a city at night, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so in China, it's you still need to watch, but not at all to the level you have to be careful in US,
So we talked about this a little bit in the last video, that a lot of the problems of American culture are just out there in the open, that a lot of the problems in American culture don't get dealt with by the government. And so this means there are, in pretty much every city in the U.S., you have dangerous areas where you do not want to be at night. It's just too risky. It's too risky. And so the way that what I would look for, usually the best indicator is going to be poorer areas, just being straight up about it. If you go into areas where you see that buildings are kind of run down, or sort of one-story, very, very small properties, very small homes that look like they were built maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and just that there's damage to the properties, it's clearly not clean, it's not being maintained, maybe the yards are not mowed, just things are not being, the upkeep is not being done. When you see that kind of stuff, and also sometimes you'll just see homes that are completely run down and abandoned. If you see a lot of those, a lot of homes that are just abandoned and completely run down, look like nobody's lived in them for 10 years or something like this, you're probably in a bad area. You don't want to be there. And you're likely, especially at night, you're probably going to find drug crime there. There's people with guns. There's people that are going to rob you. You just don't want to be there. Okay. And then other than that, I mean, and a tip or a suggestion would be to keep where there's light. Keep where there's a lot of people. If you're in the downtown and there's lots of people, there's a lot of activity, a lot of eyeballs, much less likely that anything bad is going to happen there. So as it gets later and later and more people start to go home and more people start to go home, you might want to go home too.
Don't go to the dark alley, basically.
Yeah, don't go to dark alleys. Try not to be by yourself in different places. Even if you're with somebody else, you generally want to keep to where there's activity going on. There's a lot of eyeballs. So people can help you out, but even more than that, if somebody was going to do something bad, they know there's a very high probability they're going to get caught. Yeah. So I think that probably covers what I wanted to say with safety.
What about the police? If you got pulled over by police?
Yeah, I can give so maybe just a suggestion for if you get pulled over by police. I generally don't think this is something that you have to be that concerned about. Just do some simple things. One simple thing would be to put your hands on the steering wheel where the police can see them. Make them very visible and don't move your hands. Just wait patiently. The officer will come and talk to you, usually from the left side of your car. They'll ask you to roll the window down, talk to them, be polite, be respectful, listen to what they have to say. They're probably just going to tell you what you did wrong, or they might ask you, do you know what you did wrong? Almost every police interaction I've had has gone that way. They said, do you know what you did wrong? And then you can tell them or not. They're either going to write you a ticket or not. And I wouldn't really worry about that. Just keep it simple and be polite and respectful. And almost every single police interaction is going to go easy and smooth and you're going to get a ticket or not, and then you'll be on your way.
Yeah. Have you ever met fake cops in U.S. while, when you were doing like those road tripping? Because I heard people talking about that, especially in those, Midwest states and at night. And then that car pretend to be a police car and pull you over, just rob you.
Yeah. I never have. And so what I would say is that you have rights, and a police officer that pulls you over should tell you why they pulled you over. And if they have no reason for pulling you over, they legally can't keep you there. Legally, they cannot keep you there, okay? So you are free to go. So what you can say is, why am I being detained? Am I being detained? Am I under arrest? Am I being detained? And if they say, no, you're not being detained, you can just leave, okay? Now, obviously, some of those situations, if they're clearly aggressive towards you and you sense that this person, because at the end of the day, people could pretend to be a police officer,
right. Yeah, not just
they
in
could.
Mexico. They could be in
They
US
could.
too, but not very common.
I think it's very uncommon. But nevertheless, if that situation were to ever occur, you'd want to make the correct decision because the consequences, the stakes are your life.
Yeah.
So you don't want to make the wrong decision there. So you always want to be aware of that possibility and, be alert to signs that this person is not who they say they are. Yeah. But it's illegal to impersonate a police officer. So people don't tend to do that. But an officer should have pretty specific conduct and things that they say. And so if you feel like there's something weird going on, you can ask, am I being detained? And they say yes. You say, what crime have I committed, or what am I being detained for? What traffic violation did I commit? They should be able to articulate to you what that is. If they can't, maybe you're in a weird situation. You can always call for a superior officer. Say, I want to speak.
Check if they are the
you could call 911, or you could say, I want to speak to a supervisor. If you ask to speak to a supervisor, they are supposed to send a supervisor to the location.
We just
Okay.
don't want whoever pretending to be a police send it to their fellow and claim it's a supervisor. So I think you better call 911. Say, I'm at here. I'm not sure if this is the real officer. Can help me check. I think that's one way.
But in general, just keep your hands on the steering wheel. Be polite. Be respectful. They'll probably ask for your ID. Move slowly. If you need to reach for your wallet and stuff, say, I'm going to grab my wallet. It's in my back pocket. Just tell them what you're doing, or just move slowly. If you don't speak English, just move slowly. Show the actions very clearly, and show that you're peaceful. And also just don't get out of the car. If you get pulled over, you want to stay in your car until the officer comes to you. Yeah. Okay. If they ask you to get out of your car, they generally won't do that unless you're drunk driving.
Unless they're about to arrest you.
Unless they're about to arrest you,
yeah.
They will
ask you to step
out. If they're going to arrest you, but they only arrest you if you're drunk driving or you were going like 40 miles over the speed limit or you're driving all over the place, doing something crazy. So otherwise, stay in the car. If you pull over to the side of the road and you just get out of the car, they're going to be a little worried because that's unusual behavior. People are supposed to stay in their car when they get pulled over. And the only other thing I would say is typically when an officer puts their lights on and gets behind you to indicate they want you to pull over, typically you are supposed to pull over right away. Okay, that's what they want you to do. But the only thing I would say is a lot of times, I personally, you got to be careful with this because you want to pull over quickly. You want to pull over pretty quickly. But I like to look for what I feel is a safer place to pull over. And so if I'm in some dark place where there's nobody, I'm a little nervous to pull over there. And I would want to...
That's why I saw one tip online. If you suspect someone, if you are traveling in Midwest and barely any cars and you suspect this police car is actually a fake cop, you would pull over actually to a wild lead, like a gas station. Don't just pull over at the black road. Then they can rob you.
That's what I would say. So is look for a good place to pull over, even just from the standpoint of if it's a busy road, looking for a safe place where you're not going to get hit by another car while you're waiting on the side of the road. But yeah, if you're in some dark area, try to look for a place where it's, like you said, a gas station, more well lit. And even if this might piss the cop off, like police don't want to chase you for a while. They don't want to follow you for a while. They want you to pull over quickly. But it's worth protecting your safety to aggravate the cop a little bit, get to that destination where you feel safer, and then just say, look, I didn't mean to do anything. I just want to make sure that I'm in a safe place. That's all. Yeah. Communicate it. If you drive for like 30 minutes looking for a safe place, they're gonna think you they're gonna so you gotta. This is all with you gotta make you gotta think about what you're doing and but yeah. Okay, Shuang is going to share an experience about using a credit card and traveling from China to the U.S.
So I'm gonna speak Mandarin for this. So it's about this. 所以就是我想给大家分享的一点就是，如果你来美国旅游或者是在这儿生活，无论你是哪一种，就是你如果需要就是出去消费的时候用到你中国银行，就比如说中国的任何银行的信用卡，然后我还是希望大家就是稍微保护一下你的卡片，因为这个是发生在我自己身上一个真实的经历。就在前不久前，就是我的父母来美国看我嘛。然后我爸爸就是付钱的时候都会用他中国银行的信用卡，然后我们去了佐治亚州一个就是旅游景点去旅游嘛，然后我们入住了当地的一个酒店，就是我们最后他种种奇怪的行为让我们非常怀疑，就是那家酒店盗取了我们的信息，然后我就觉得我可以给大家的一些建议就是如果你来美国就需要用中国的消费卡。比如说你去餐厅的话，一般在美国这边都是他吃完饭会把你的那个账单拿过来嘛，然后你看一下价格对不对之后，如果你用卡消费的话，你就直接卡让他拿走嘛。在这里我就会建议大家，你尽量就是去前台付款，或者是跟着这个 waiter 这个服务员去付款，然后这样就能有效的就是防止一些就是那些就是心怀不轨的服务员去窃取你卡片的信息，然后之后会盗刷嘛。然后因为这个酒店发生在我们身上的事是后来我爸爸的卡被盗刷了大约将近800美元，后来呢也是通过跟银行联系，确实是中国银行也把这个钱补给我们了，但是我在就是一些社交平台，比如说小红书或其他地方，好像是
就是如果是中国的信用卡被盗刷了，我看好多人分享他们是拿不回来这个钱的，具体是要看你是在什么银行开的卡，然后所以我就觉得大家最好用胶布把那个卡片后边的那3位数给贴上，然后呢你去酒店吃饭，或者是你去那个餐厅吃饭，或者是酒店入住，就是时刻你的眼睛不要离开你的卡片。据我所知，盗刷就是尤其是盗刷中国的信用卡，就是在美国发生的还是非常普遍的。如果可以的话，如果你是来旅游的话，就是在你境外就是旅游的时候，我还是非常建议你就是开通那个银行的就是短信信息，你每消费一笔，你手机马上就能收到那个钱款嘛，还有就是把那个额度调低，因为这些骗子我看上网上的案例，也就是如果他们一刷的话，有时候会好几笔，但是每一笔都会金额比较大，就是像我这种情况，我的这个还算小的，很多人我看网上分享的经验都是1000或$2000，就是这种大额度的，所以我建议你就是不仅开通这个银行的就是这个提醒信息，还尽量把你的额度调小，比如说$100呀、$200呀，然后反正我觉得这样的话就是把额度调小，就是超过这个额度，银行会给你发信息，然后他那个钱是划不走的。所以我觉得如果来美国旅游或者生活仍然用中国的信用卡，还是非常有必要来保护一下你这个卡片的信息。在美国呢，如果你有美国的银行卡，我觉得是不用太担心。就是这个不像就是你有中国的信用卡，那么就是要担心你的信息，因为我们原来就是账户被盗刷好多次，我们的银行都是就是很快就补给我们，一旦证实是确实是被盗刷的。但是中国银行就是中国的银行好像没有那么好交易，所以还是提醒大家就是防骗。